All right, everybody. This is going to be a fun one because we're going to be talking. It's going to be like slumber party girl time talking old TV news shop stories. So get out your Twizzlers and your curling iron and your nail polish because just settle in. All right, it's going to be fun. So I got Faran here. She's got a YouTube channel, Faran Balanced. She has a very similar background to me as far as being a TV reporter, a local TV news reporter, and Faran, I'm going to ask you so many questions about what are you doing now and how'd you get out of it? And we can just trade old shop stories. But I want to get into the USA Today story real fast before we get all that. Because I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for a while since I heard about it. Mainly what I cover on my podcast is censorship, is the idea that there are certain people who are just egregious spreaders of disinformation. And then there's the corporate news, which should be an authoritative source and, just like allowed to be out there and promoted. YouTube, for instance, promotes them and says, Susan Wojcicki has been very clear about the fact that they're considered authoritative. Then you see stuff like this. USA Today removed 23 stories from website, other platforms following audit of reporters' work. And you're like, wait a second, why do they get to be authoritative? Not because I don't even necessarily say they're worse than independents. I mean, independents get stuff wrong too. My argument has always just been that everybody has a bias. Everybody has the ability to make mistakes. Everybody's fallible. And I think it's a misnomer to consider our old industry, especially with some of the stuff that I've talked about on my channel, to consider them like the gospel in journalism. So anyway, let's talk about what happened here. Are you familiar with the story?
Bits and pieces, but go ahead and roll on through.
Okay. So the title obviously shows USA Today removed 23 stories from website, other platforms following audit of reporters' work. Now, the first thing I always thought was interesting was they use the word audit. I don't even know what that means. I've never been audited as a reporter. I feel like that makes it maybe more professional or business-like, as if that happens or something, like you get audited by the IRS. I don't know what it really, to me, that just means that like we got some information that our reporter might be making shit up. And then we decided to start checking into it. And we're like, oh crap.
And I have a feeling I'm looking at the date on this, and I have a feeling I can sense maybe who was the catalyst, but I'll get to my thoughts after you explain.
Okay. Okay, good. So after receiving an external correction request, so basically a demand for somebody that this lady probably did a story about, likely wrote and said she got it wrong, or there's something incorrect about this. And I'll be honest, I've had, like, you get complaints all the time, and in my newsroom, I've seen stuff like that come in, but I've never seen it lead to something like this. So I just find that a whole nother interesting phenomenon. But all right. So because you don't just get like an external correction request, then all of a sudden that leads to 23 articles taken away, the person gets fired, all that stuff. But it says the audit revealed that some individuals quoted were not affiliated with the organizations claimed and appeared to be fabricated. The existence of other individuals quoted could not be independently verified. So the existence of people quoted, not even just the quotes, but the fact that they existed at all.
They were ghosts. Yeah. Wow.
And in addition, some stories included quotes that should have been credited to others. As a result, USA Today removed 23 articles from its website and other platforms for not meeting our editorial standards. The headlines of the articles are listed below. Miranda has resigned as a reporter for USA Today and the USA Today network. And so then they say how they're going to, they're going to improve their work and how this is part of that. And then these are the articles, which you can't find anymore. When you click on them, it just basically takes you back to this article. But one's about Washington, D.C. couples call wedding dance ban excessive. TikTok bans milk crate challenge from its app, citing concerns over dangerous acts. Texas abortion ban could lead to stockpiling contraceptives and pregnancy tests. Breast cancer, Korean culture, Day of the Dead, holiday Friendsgiving has grown. It's not like, some of these things I guess are serious, and then others seem like features. So I don't really know what her beat was, but so that's that. And I guess like I said, at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm not trying to like dog USA Today in the sense that see how crappy they are. It's just because I focus on the fact that we're in this world, this like information censorship war world
Mhm.
where, like I said, it's just this false dichotomy of like the corporate news is the trustworthy, they never get things wrong, they don't spread propaganda, versus we should start, really combing through the independents. Like, I don't know, I just think it's a false dichotomy, and I think it's fair pointing out that they have issues too. That's all.
Mhm. So, if you remember 2 weeks ago, there was a woman at the Washington Post named Taylor Lorenz that was called out by YouTubers specifically covering the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, and she wrote an article basically calling them grifters. And I have direct knowledge of this because I was one of the journalists there at the trial covering the case. And it's this whole branch, of LawTube for those that don't know. And in Taylor Lorenz's article, she cited one of the channels called Legal Bites. Her name is Alita. And she said how she had contacted her. There's another YouTube channel called The Umbrella Guy. And for those that don't know, Taylor Lorenz, she's a feature reporter. And she also was the technology and like internet reporter, basically. In her article, she said she contacted all these people. Then Alita comes out and she's like, I don't have an email. I don't have anything from you. Same with
Mhm.
the Umbrella Guy. And it turns out that she never contacted them. And so what does she do? She then, after the fact, sends her like an Instagram and is like, hey, can you comment? Still doesn't reach out to the Umbrella Guy. And then proceeds to correct the article saying that she did reach out on Instagram. And then when Alita came back and was like, no, you just reached out on Instagram before you even wrote the article. And then they switched it up again, to which then Taylor Lorenz blamed her editor. And so she has been known to have a lot of strange journalistic practices, mainly in not contacting sources when she said she has, a lot of other stuff. And so she was recently demoted. She's denying it, but them saying that she's been demoted and now she has to go through like the editor of editors at WAPO in order to get her stuff published. And this happened 2 weeks ago. I look at the date of this, June 16th. Personally, I think USA Today was probably trying to get ahead of it because I see where one of the articles was about
Yeah.
TikTokers. Taylor Lorenz covers a lot of TikTokers. And there were other TikTokers in the past who said that she hasn't contacted us. She's been trying to dox us. If you remember the libs of TikTok that she was
Mhm.
talking with. And I think a lot of it is that people can come forward and say, no, I didn't get an email. No, you didn't contact me. Now, the one part that's weird about this is the fact that some of these people for this reporter didn't even exist. So you wouldn't have gotten that self check. But
Right.
to me, it just seems like it's a double-edged sword with this, because it's like, okay, why were you guys not checking this stuff out in the first place? Number one. But number two, in light of Taylor Lorenz and then all of the other crazy stuff happening at WAPO with Felicia Somnes and that whole saga, I think maybe this is a check to management and news companies to,
Mhm.
hey, maybe you should start checking and double checking, because sometimes people can make shit up. It happens. People have an agenda sometimes.
Right. Well, so let's talk about how would that happen. I don't know what your experience was, but I barely had time to go to the bathroom when I was
Yeah.
working in TV news. So,
Yeah.
and there were plenty of times, I mean, really, especially towards the end of my career, and one of the major reasons I got out was the amount of times I'd go to my manager for copy editing. They'd read through the script, but like they're not calling the person I quote saying, "Did you say this?" or "Do you really exist?" They're assuming that I'm doing my job, that the person
Yeah.
does exist, and then I'm quoting them correctly. All of these things are just assumptions that are made along the supply chain, if you will. And in my case, as I was starting to learn more about my topic that I covered, which was the environment towards the end, I realized what I didn't know. It took me many years of covering one beat to be competent enough in it to realize how much I didn't know about it. And then when I started seeing how much I didn't know and how often I was going to my manager and they would go, "Well, what about this or what about that?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? You gave me 2 hours to do this. Like, how am I supposed to find that out? I don't
Yeah.
know. I have no clue." And they would go, okay, and then we would just run the story anyway.
Yeah.
And then I started feeling like how I was just complicit in going on air, acting like an authority when, really I was kind of D-list knowledge base. Like I was like, I don't know, JV in that regard. I thought I was
Mhm.
varsity until I started realizing what I didn't know. And then I
Right.
was like, hang on, I got a lot of questions about this. And I remember even one specific time where I came back to the newsroom. I really wanted to read a Senate report. I was doing something on the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act is extremely complicated. It's not as easy as a lot of people think, where it's like,
It's not light reading, yeah.
it's not like reading, and it's also in some cases it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting cleaner water. It can
Mhm.
mean a lot of fines for people like farmers who have a puddle on their property all of a sudden. Now they've got an estuary, a protected estuary, and they have to totally reformat the way that they do
Mhm.
agriculture. It can be really crazy, but it's often sold like Clean Out Water Act good. If you do anything to it, that's bad. And that one day I came back and I turned to my coworker who had been in the business 40 years, a very well-known anchor in the Seattle area. And I was like, I don't have time to read this report. It's really frustrating. I feel like I shouldn't go on air tonight because I just, I don't know the answer to a lot of these questions. And she goes, just write what NBC has because they usually get it right. And so like the
Oh.
idea is that if you just like recycle your affiliate or, you stick to the master plan, what everybody else is doing, at least you fly under their cover. So like all these
Mhm.
things go into 23 articles that can be completely fabricated, and you can see how along the way it doesn't necessarily always have to be a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. It's all these,
Mhm.
stormtroopers that don't have time or don't know what they're doing or have big egos or whatever, and then that turns into fake news. So how would you prevent that from happening, knowing what you know about what it's like behind the scenes?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many areas to start. I mean, it's like in any case right now, whether it's, climate change or school shootings or whatever, there's all these levels that you have to look at. Um, so my background is I started as a young buck reporter coming right out of journalism school. I was in Rockford, Illinois. Then I was in South Bend, Indiana, where then I was the anchor for Fox, where I covered Pete Buttigieg and his whole mayoralship, which that's a fun story. Then I was in El Paso, Texas during the election, where I covered the border wall. I was the anchor for NBC down there, covered Beto O'Rourke's Senate campaign. I was the first call saying that he was running for Senate. Then I actually switched for a little bit and I got into media consulting for both the Ted Cruz and the Beto O'Rourke campaign when I lived in Austin. Then I was up in Grand Rapids as a morning anchor for ABC. And then here in DC, I worked for an international news station. And that's where my mind was completely blown wide open because I learned all about foreign policy. I had more time to research my stuff because it was more of a network versus the local news. And that's what I think is the biggest thing is local news. You have such hard, tight deadlines and you don't have all of this padding to, you can't have an anchor just sit and talk for 3 minutes because your report didn't come in on time. That's tough. And you can't give weather 7 minutes, to make up for that lost time. Whereas at network level, it's so much different because you have all of this. You're like, oh, we can take the report from over here. We can take a report from over here. If you're not ready, don't worry. We'll put you in the next hour where it's this 24/7 news cycle. But it was working for an international station where I learned so much about what we don't know. I learned that I don't know what I don't know, and it was one of those things where I learned how the world views the United States. I learned how the world views our media. I learned how basically we're not who we think we are, which was sad at first as an American, right? But then after it was like, okay, well, now that I know what I don't know, you know, let's try kind of change it. And at the
Mhm.
network level, you had many people with their own agendas. At our network, we had somebody that was super far left, we had somebody that was super far right. My primetime show was just right down the middle, straight facts. As I tell everybody, I hate the Democrats. I hate the Republicans. I hate them all, especially after living here in DC. They're all lying to us. So that's kind of where it was that, speak truth to power. The problem is in local news, though, just like what you experience, where you're like, I don't have time to read this. We'll just copy it. Well, how do you know that they read it correctly? And the fact that you don't have that time as a journalist, and you're taught in journalism school, oh, it's going to be perfect. You're going to love it. You're going to change the world. And then you get in it and sometimes you're like, I feel like I'm just regurgitating what they just told me to say, and that's the
Mhm.
one part that was kind of like, ugh. However, I will say the beauty of local news, though, that I did learn is that's where the most change can happen as people, when they're angry with their governments or what have you. That's where you can see the most change. And you also learn in local news how a government works by just the tiny little local level and what a city manager does and what the mayor does and what a comptroller is. So that was a great learning experience. But yeah, it's just those hard deadlines for local news are so tough. And I commend young reporters out there now because I was the anchor checking their stories. And I was actually the anchor being like, okay, are you sure this person is who they say they are? Did you check? Did you call their employer? And they were like, wait, I need to do that. And it was like, yeah,
Right.
you can't blast some guy, some
Yeah.
employment, place that he says he was fired from if you don't have record of him working there. And they're like, oh, okay. And I feel like it was anchors. I had such great mentorship like that. And I feel
Mhm.
like now young reporters don't have that because of anchors having to do so much more. Because for those that don't know, now in the local news industry, they're paying you less. They're having you do 3 jobs when it used to be divvied out to 3 different people. And you just lose all that time. Whereas at the network level, you do have more time. However, it's also more of the responsibility to be accurate because when you're not, your audience will call you out real quick.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so true. Somebody I thought this was pretty funny. Somebody asked if you have a sister named Safe and Effective.
No, I don't. But it's a good idea
Um,
for a name.
yeah, no, so true, but then, like, you think about it's both and because then you think about that anchor that I was talking about whose
Right.
mentorship was just regurgitate NBC, and,
Mhm.
there are a lot of people in the business who I think still feel like it is sort of a higher level of ethics and thinking and that we out here are like just the wild west with no ethics and no no thinking and so we just don't follow the same standards or whatever else and so then they I think unfortunately fall into that same way of thinking which is just we are the authoritative source. NBC is an authoritative source, so if you just repeat what NBC says, which in that particular case, I knew there was no way an NBC reporter in New York City knew more about the environment than I did if I was somebody who was covering the environment every single day. I was like one of the only
Yeah.
environmental reporters who did it full time for a TV station in the entire country. They're like, so I was like, there's, I just don't believe it. And do I really think that the reporter did that story read through the whole Clean Water Act? Do I think that they've done the I don't know, just the reporting on it that I had done, and I just didn't buy that anymore. That I could just trust somebody across the country to tell me what was going on. Now, to your point about local news, you do have the ability to get closer to the source, and so I think like if there's a place
Mhm.
where you could resurrect journalism, to me, I would start at a local newsroom because you
Absolutely, yeah.
can right because you can like you go to the city council meetings, you don't just hear about them, you
Right.
talk to the people face to face, you live in the community. They could throw eggs at you at the grocery store. There's more buy-in to make sure that you get it right, I think, in local news and
Right.
just ability to just be to be there, to actually like be there. And that sounds kind of dumb when you're thinking about journalism, like as in everybody there. No, a lot of the people who work at the network like a level, you're just making phone calls and
Exactly.
taking down quotes.
Exactly. Mhm. Yeah.
So it's yeah, you're just farther away. You're separated from the source, I guess, and then the telephone game begins. So, okay, so any final thoughts on the USA Today story before we move to something else?
Again, it's just one of those things where I applaud them for going back and checking. However, that's your job. Like your job is to make sure the truth is supposed to go out there and it is one of those things where hey guys, like 23 I could understand maybe 4. 23, wow. And that should scare some people, but I will say, you had it start from the Trump era where he called out the mainstream media and whatnot. And while some say that it was an attack on the media, yes, but in some ways it kind of held their feet to the fire a little bit to say, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I know, for example, living here in DC and not being part of those legacy networks, that I had more of the chance to question what our leaders were doing, like Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, what have you, here in DC, because a lot of the other networks, they would bring them on. They'd have to ask softball questions to make sure that, they come back again. Whereas me, it was like, hey, like, I know you're probably never going to want to come on here. So if this is a one and done, I'm just going to kind of shoot it to you straight. And that's the one thing that you're seeing today is a lot of people are just afraid to ask those hard-hitting questions, which is no surprise that a lot of these stories were kind of feature stories, as you said, from this reporter. But still, if you can't get a feature story right and sources on a feature story, what kind of reporter are you? Those are the easiest interviews for us, as you know, in the business, because a lot of it's just fun softball questions or just kind of, a great conversation and writing about it. So to me, good on them for finding these articles, but come on, guys, you got to do better.
Right. Okay. And so this is why I bring it up. And I talked about this. I have a show that we do for supporters only on ROKFIN, Locals, and Patreon. And just a shout out for everybody who is a supporter over there. Thank you. And they get this show called Tittle Tattle that I do with Bill Doris, who also used to be in TV news. And maybe sometime we can have a roundtable and all get together and chat live. But we talked about this video, which I'd like to hear from you as now being a YouTuber. So like you're out there and you're trying to cover news. And I'm just curious what kind of censorship issues you've dealt with, because you're doing really well. On your channel so far. I don't know if you've like tried to touch on some of these topics that they get a little prickly about, but this is Susan at the World Economic Forum talking about misinformation. I'm going to get it queued up in a second, but basically what she talks about is how they are aligning the YouTube content to be what they feel like is leading the public in the right direction, the safe and authoritative sources. And so it's focused on, what she said is basically people you've heard about before, like, sources you've heard about, not just some random person in their basement. If you've heard of the New York Times or NBC or Fox or whatever, these are the people we're promoting. And they were sort of labeling anyone who does news outside of that as I don't know, just either
rogue journalists.
Exactly. Just as like we're just basically flagging them as well. I think I'm flagged as borderline. I don't know. You probably aren't there yet. I call myself. I have a borderline YouTube personality disorder. I guess I don't know. That's what they have me flagged as. Red flag law. But they also derank people who haven't necessarily pissed them off like I have, and I think you don't get the same kind of fair shake that you would have even 3 or 5 years ago. I think it would have been a lot easier to grow on YouTube doing news, especially as somebody who left the media. So can you tell me a little bit about what that's been like for you? Like just growing your channel and doing news in an era where they're very prickly about not just the subject itself, but how you're covering the subject, especially if you're trying to give people an alternative view of a mainstream narrative.
So I'll be completely honest. I always kind of had a YouTube channel as far as, I would post like my old reports on there that I was doing when I worked for my international network. And then so for those that don't know, so I worked for RT America and we were actually shut down. And it all has stemmed around the invasion in Ukraine. And I was very much against it because I said, hey, it's 2022, guys. What are we doing invading a country? And, it was one of those things, seeing that and how the United States can just immediately pull the plug on a news outlet was insanely scary, because then you look over at other countries who do the same thing, yet we're calling their countries democracies and these free speech beacons as well, like Ukraine, who pulled the plug on any outlet that wasn't pro-Ukraine. It was asking questions. And so I saw firsthand kind of the censorship right from the get-go. And it was a cold rag. And it was a cold rag in the face, a punch to the gut, and a slap across the face all at the same time. And so I was kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do next, where to go. I had the option to move to Moscow. Not on my list. I have too much family here. But the other thing too was I kept watching YouTube and I saw this whole thing happen with the Johnny Depp trial. And I was like, wow, you're seeing the mainstream media kind of spin this narrative of how he was this horrible wife beater and he was this horrible guy. And then I was watching the trial via my friends on LawTube. And, these are accomplished lawyers and they're like, nope, that's not correct. That's not correct. And as I was watching the trial and then watching the way the mainstream media was covering it, I was like, wow, you can tell they're not watching the trial at all. They're grabbing their sound bites, grabbing what they need. They'll still cover it because it's clickbait.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to know about Johnny Depp? And that's when they started having me come on as like their media analyst and being like, well, what sound bites did you hear today that they're going to pick? And how do you think they're going to spin it? And every single time I was like, you guys, they're not going to spin it towards Johnny till the very, very end when, when they see all of these people saying like, no, he's innocent, because there was just this massive coverage of this trial, right? And here I'm like, why do I care about two celebrities fighting? But it was just interesting just to see the dichotomy of one tiny little trial. And to that, that's when I started doing my news every night. And one of the big things that I touch upon a lot is foreign policy. And a lot of people, my channel was growing. The minute I started talking about foreign policy on my channel, I'm seeing kind of a lull, which is interesting because I'm an American. I love my country, but it also as an American, I'm allowed to question the things that they're doing. And we're seeing a lot with today's day and age where gas prices are super high. We're about to, we're having record inflation. We're about to have a food shortage. It's going to get worse because Ukraine, the breadbasket of the world, is having a loss, which is going to start affecting all of us even more. Nobody's really talking about it or looking ahead. And that's what true journalism is, right? Looking ahead, asking questions that not everybody is. And so I'm starting to see the plateau, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And again, I'm not pro Russia or pro Ukraine. I'm just saying, wait a minute, we can find all this money to send to Ukraine right away, but when it comes to like 1 in 6 kids goes to bed hungry every night, we have a baby formula shortage, gas is super high, we sanction the crap out of Russia, yet the ruble is the highest it's ever been, and we're suffering horribly. Does anybody want to start asking questions like, hey, was this maybe a mistake? But it's just, you saw the mainstream and legacy media completely jumping on, I support Ukraine. Let's throw all this money at them. Not even asking the question, well, what is that going to do for us? And that to me, when I was asking those questions, oh no, girlfriend, you're cut. So I've seen it.
I thought the RT News poll was really fascinating to just watch that in real time. As somebody who's like awake now to that stuff, that could have happened 5 or 10 years ago. I would never have been paying attention to it. And I also wouldn't have seen the significance of it as a corporate journalist. I guess I don't know. I probably was like everybody else thinking that, you just deserved it or something. And just didn't think about the implications of it. Somebody was asking, what did you mean about, I'm trying to find it. What did you mean the USA pulled the plug?
Oh, meaning like they shut us down. They shut RT America down. Yeah. And mind you, the people that were at RT America were American journalists covering American news. It was just, we were asking more questions than mainstream media. For example, my mentor and friend who I replaced as the primetime anchor was Rick Sanchez, a former CNN anchor. You also had the late and great Ed Schultz, who came from MSNBC, who was trying to bring Bernie on his program on MSNBC when they were all pro-Hillary during the 2016 election. We had a number of other people. The late and great Larry King was on it. I mean, we had a number of people from all different walks of life on all ends of the political spectrum. So it was a really, really fun learning experience because not only did I learn about foreign policy, I learned how others think. Another friend of mine, comedian Lee Camp, super on the left, very progressive. I always, was very centrist, but then I saw a lot of what he was saying and learned more about Julian Assange through him and all of that, because I had always been told one thing about Assange. And it was almost kind of like, I hate that term, you get red pilled, because it makes you sound like, I don't know, but it's just, it truly was that. You just wake up and you're like, wow, like I have been so blinded and I didn't even realize, because we're in such a bubble. And,
Mhm.
at the network, I actually worked with more people that were from Venezuela and Colombia and South America than I did from Russia, believe it or not. But one of the things that I learned is from people that worked with me that were from Europe. They were like, "You have no idea. In Europe, we have an entire block on foreign policy and what's going on in our local news." And they're like, the local news here in America, you don't get any of that." And they're like, "The first time we've actually seen that is with the whole war in Ukraine." And I was like, well, that explains why Americans are very ignorant on a lot of different things when it comes to foreign policy, because we just don't cover it the way the rest of the world does, which again, you're just like, wow. Wow, how blind have I been, you know?
Yeah, yeah, totally. As I said earlier when we first started this, it requires it requires a level of competency to know what you don't know. Like they often say
Mhm.
that the more you know, the more you start realizing how little you don't know. And I think there's intentional and unintentional ways that reporters in corporate news are sort of kept in that. I do think, I don't know, maybe you have a different opinion on this, that it is, I don't know, when I started to wake up, I did offer my bosses an option to help me reformat my position. And I think they just were like, how are we going to do a daily newscast like this with this lady? I mean, it's just something
Exactly.
like, so the way I saw it, I had to just change the system entirely, the way that I did my job. Insofar as I was even like, what I wanted to do was turn the TV part of it, because TV takes a lot of time to produce. You're driving to all these interviews and you're putting videos together and all that stuff. And then the web story, which a lot of people were reading, we were just like copying and pasting our TV script and throwing it on there. And I wanted to change it so that I was spending more time on long form online and then using the TV portion to just say, hey, this is a tease to a bigger story. And then that
Right.
would also solve my problem that I kind of saw, which was we were going on kind of pretending to be the authority and that this was a complete look at what is going on. But the reality was, like, A, we weren't really authorities because we didn't really know what we were talking about. And number two, this isn't a complete report. It's 90 seconds of 10-second sound bites. It's a very shallow overview. And if we would have just said, hey, thank you for watching the 5 o'clock news, here's just a bunch of 90-second shallow overviews that we're not really sure are completely accurate. So take it
Mhm.
with a grain of salt and do your own research. I would have been like, that's great. I could totally see, you could keep doing the product, but at least it's truth in advertising instead of like, we're the most trusted name in news. We're the most accurate name in news, whatever. And keep like, pounding that drum. And I just didn't buy it anymore. But the system itself, like, it's like once you start waking up, you're like, how can I keep working in this system? And I
Yeah,
just felt like, it wasn't really an option. Hey, Farron, are you a wine drinker?
I am.
Okay. Well, you've come to the right place because
And
you
I've been watching this with you. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna try some.
yeah, so I got I as when I do live streams, the one awkward part about the live streams is I got to give my sponsors a shout out because they keep me in business. But
Hey, in
anyway,
journalism, that's all we have right now, you know? That and super chats.
I know. Well, yeah, and if you can't, well, Eric Hunley used to say, if you when we had news with booze, we can't take it straight. So if you can't take it straight, you're reading the news and you're just like, I just can't take it straight. Then go to AllisonWinePromo.com and have 50% off some amazing wines and 50% off shipping. And I love the fact that now we have a Rogue Malbec in here. These are all from Argentina. They're high altitude, very remote wines. So fewer pesticides, and then also robust taste because they're grown at very high altitude regions. A lot of these are small operations. You can't get this at the grocery store, and it helps you support my work. And you get a significant discount off some really, really great wines. And they all pair very well with like summer grilling season. So go check that out. But you can also go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, get some organic wine from Nicaragua. Small family owned company, all local to Nicaragua. All the jobs stay local. The coffee is grown, harvested, and roasted there. There's a limited black edition. There's also Katura tea. If you're a tea drinker, you can check that out. I don't know if you've heard of this stuff, Farron. I just started drinking it, but it's tea made from the coffee fruit. So it's like the fruit around the
Oh.
coffee bean,
Mhm.
and then you put it in like a tea. Or you can cold brew. I like to cold brew mine. It's very good.
I
It tastes a
love
lot like
cold brew,
black tea.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, check out sponsors. Have you had to deal with like just curious, like on your own now? Do you do the sponsor thing, or how do you think through that? Because a lot of people go, advertising is the bane of corporate news. It's why they're all influenced by big pharma. I never had anybody say in an editorial meeting, guys, we got to run interference for big pharma because they pay our bills. But they did buy into that way of thinking. And I think
Yeah.
it's just because they're manipulated by the own advertising and the own marketing, that they're purveying. I don't think it's because they know, they're conscious of the fact that they're like, we know we're lying, but we're getting paid by Pfizer, so we better say the truth. I think they're true believers. But I'm just curious, how have you handled all that?
So the one thing that really made me question local news, and here's what I will say, is when you have your smaller cities, like when I worked in the Rockford, Illinois, the South Bend, the El Paso, where they're smaller markets, I felt like it was truer news because it was more a smaller population. And you could you did have a little bit more time to cover stuff and look at stuff thoroughly versus when you get to your big cities like your DC, Chicago, which is where my hometown is, your New York, your LA, Seattle, where you were. It's really, really easy to fall into that. Okay, we just got to get it done. We got to be first. Don't mind about being accurate. Just get it out there first. And I will say it was those smaller markets where I really saw more of the true journalism happening. As I started climbing up the ladder into those bigger markets, it was like, oh, and it was when I was in Grand Rapids is where I saw it firsthand, which is like market 36, I want to say, I think. And it's in the 30s. And I was working on a story where there was the GM recall, and it was where the pedal was sticking. And this woman, it happened to her. She crashed into a tree. She lost her leg because of it. And I talked to her, got her to agree to do an interview. And it was going to be like the whole what happened. And this is the face of a GM recall, right? And I bring it to my news director because I was the morning show anchor. So it was going to be kind of a sad story for a morning show program. And so I wanted to get the okay. And she was like, I absolutely love this story. And I would want to do a sweeps piece on it, or a ratings piece for those that don't know sweeps. And she's like, but we're never going to get it past sales. And I was like, why? And she's like, GM is like our biggest donor. We're in Michigan. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And she even knew, and you could even tell with her where she was upset by it. But that's when I saw the advertising game in, those bigger markets, but it's still local. And you're like, God, this is where we're at, However, as far as like the big pharma and stuff like that, I will say, just like you, I've never been like, hey guys, today we need to push big pharma. It doesn't really go like that. But like you said, they will sometimes buy into the narratives, which it's like, hang on, what are you guys doing? But I will say in those smaller local markets though, where you're a bigger fish in a little pond, you can say, well, hang on, how about we cover the other side? And sometimes those news directors, since it's usually their first time being a news director, they'll say, okay, yeah, let's try it. And as long as you kind of cautionally do it and not go too rogue, it can kind of get there with local news. But yeah, sometimes you're walking a fine line there.
Okay, showing everybody your YouTube channel, Faran Balanced. Again, sister named Safe and Effective. No, just kidding. What has been the best change about being outside of the corporate model and doing things on your own? And what has been the most difficult or unexpected?
Well, I will say it's the money and the advertising. Like like I said, I'm so new. I literally started this whole thing on my YouTube channel maybe like 3 weeks ago, not even. And
You're doing so well. I mean, seriously, for 3 weeks ago, look at your numbers are so high. I mean, you're doing a lot of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, but a lot of people are, and that could easily get buried. So obviously you're doing a good enough job that you're getting promoted by YouTube, on that topic, because it could easily get, buried behind people who have much bigger channels. I don't know. I think you're doing great. What's the secret? Tell me.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, because for a while it was like, oh God, what's happening? But I will say a lot of it started though with just the Johnny Depp trial. And that's what kind of got me sucked in. And it was just my friend Joe was like, hey, you want to come on and talk about the media? Because I'm sick and tired of talking to lawyers. And I was like, okay, like, do you know what you're in for? Because I'm going to give you the whole truth. And they
Yeah.
loved it. The people loved it. And so that's kind of what started it all. But then, like I said, now that the trial's over, even though there is a motion tomorrow, but following other trials and the way that they're covered is kind of one thing that I like, and something that kind of does help with the clicks as far as, because other people are now going to be watching other trials. Like you have the Marilyn Manson versus Evan Rachel Wood trial that's coming up. However, though, again, I like just looking at all of the big media stories of the day and showing you what they're not showing you, because a lot of it, since it comes from DC, I see on the back end, just for a perfect example, yesterday on my show, I was talking about this gas tax holiday that Joe Biden's trying to push, right? And here they are, where Joe Biden already knows that Congress isn't going to put it forward. He already knows this, even though he was like this big, I can make deals. And that's what a lot of people kind of elected him on. And that he was very experienced. Well, then you have it where they're like, well, we're going to think about it. We're not going to make a decision yet. Meanwhile, they just approved to send another $1 billion to Ukraine. And yesterday, while they could have been talking about the whole gas tax holiday and figuring out how it will help with the American people or hurt the American people, or just solving the gas problem in general, I'm walking my dog outside and they have the big congressional ice cream party. And everybody's out there just hanging out. And you're not going to see that on the mainstream media. Hey, while you all suffer, they're having an ice cream party.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that other side just because I'm right here. And people kind of like it, but
Yeah.
like I said, you're not going to see it on Fox News or CNN or any of that, because it's calling them out and then they're not going to come on the shows.
Right. No, you're right. And that idea of just being able to I think it's the year of the contrarian, and maybe it will be for many years, but people who are kind of in that sort of walk away movement from whatever the establishment industry or institution is, and are just like showing people, kind of ripping the curtain back and showing people what's going on and just giving a different perspective, at least something that balances out the constant drone of propaganda that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. What has been the reaction, if you've had any, from your peers? Does anyone think Farron's just fallen off the wagon? She's just lost it, or she's just complaining because she wants to make money? Or I'm just curious, have you gotten any pushback, or are people supportive? Are they ghosting you? I don't know. And another question too, have you reached out to any of your former peers to talk to them about stuff that like you've learned about, and have they been receptive, or have they gone, yeah, whatever, Farron, you're you're just nuts?
Well, it's so funny because it's been a mix. At first, my mother was like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this streaming stuff?" Because she's that boomer generation where they don't really get it. Well, they kind of get it, but they don't get it. And I'm like, Mom, Megyn Kelly was on Fox, and look at her now. She's got her own show. It's the same thing. And she's like, oh, okay. And now she'll text me like, hey, how much money did you make in super chats tonight? And I'm like, oh, see, no, you are starting to get it. But the other thing though, too, is when RT America shut down, a lot of my friends, they were trying to get back just into the news in general, or just go to RT, which is like the main international hub, which is where a lot of them moved to Moscow. And I just didn't want to do it, because I was like, wait a minute, I've developed an audience. People liked my show. And one of the big reasons why they liked my show, which, to your point before about these 90-second sound, or these 90-second stories, and the 3-minute, interviews that you have on cable news, I had a minimum 7 minutes on my show interviewing one person to really dive into it more, because I'm not going to get anything, and I'm not even going to scratch the surface in a 3-minute interview, let alone even sometimes a 5-minute interview. So it was always 7 minutes. My producers were like, hey, she said 7 minutes, she gets 7 minutes, and they knew that I was very, very specific about that. But so as far as my friends that kind of went over, they're like watching, like, wait a minute, what is she doing? And they're like, well, we're happy to see that you found and you're keeping it going. I think a lot of them though, and this is, I think, and I'm sure you probably felt this too, that when you leave local news, it's like it's not even like going to college for the first time. It's going out, getting a job, and getting your own apartment by yourself and leaving your parents. And you're like, can I do this? Am I going to be able to afford rent and all this other stuff?
Mhm.
And it's super, super scary. But then as you start to kind of get into it and your audience gets to know you and all that, like again, I've seen your channel for a while now. And actually, when I first got on ROKFIN, it showed up right away because it asked me, are you what, a TV personality or media or journalist? And I said, journalist. And then it immediately had me sign on to you. And I started
Oh,
watching you and
thank
I
you,
was like,
Rockman.
yeah, yeah, thanks, ROKFIN. But and I saw that and I was like, okay, there are other people doing this. And there's such a need for it. People wonder why our generation loves podcasts because we
Mhm.
don't agree with the 3-minute interviews anymore. We're not
Mhm.
here for that. We'll take the time to sit down and listen to a long form interview because we've realized we're not getting all the information that we should be getting in the amount of time that cable news has you sit down and listen. So it's been an experience.
Yeah. Well, you're doing great, so keep it up.
Thank you.
Somebody was asking on Locals if you'd heard of this guy, Jason Blair, an American former journalist who worked for the New York Times, resigned from the newspaper in May 2003 in the wake of discovery of fabrication and plagiarism in his stories.
Wow.
I don't know.
I had not heard of him, no, but that's really
Who knows?
interesting.
It's Wikipedia, so they said that's the
Yeah.
link they gave me. You never know if that's even true. Whoopsie, and I just took you out of the show. That's what
No,
it's
you're
like
good.
running your own your own control
Isn't that
board.
like I always tell people because I'll be like, hang on, and I'm trying to get the whole thing. And I'm like, you guys have no idea when you're a journalist that's worked for a TV station or a network and you have a whole back end doing this for you so that all you have to do is focus on your show. And then it's like, hang on, you
Yep.
do everything now. It's like, I mean, we're already trained to do multiple things at once, but this is a new venture, I will say. That was the biggest learning curve for me is all of the gadgets and
Mhm.
the lighting we already kind of know from when we have to go out. I'm sure you probably had to go out and shoot your own stuff when you were covering
Yep.
it, so you already know lighting and camera angles and all that stuff. But it's the whole back end where you're like, and then you got to be on looking at your chat. You need to be starring your super chat so you get those, and you're just like, how am I even in this show right now? you know
Oh, totally, yeah. I wanted to end with this since I talked about it earlier and I got it queued up. But somebody did say that, and I wanted you to be able to give your producer a shout out because they were like, you need a producer too, because everyone knows I have a producer. She's a toddler, so she's well, I mean, I don't know if that's much different than a lot of producers nowadays that are getting hired younger and cheaper in
Ugh.
newsrooms. But yeah, she's coloring right now, and so far we haven't had any interruptions. So let's cross our fingers we can make it through the next couple minutes. But you have producers, right?
I have 2 associate producers and an executive producer. It's my 2 little cats, Holly and Freddie, and then, my dog, Buddy, is my executive producer. So, yeah, that's how we do it, folks, and to your point about hiring producers young, I was actually just on the phone with Rick Sanchez the other day, and he was like, "Farron, you're not gonna believe this because he has all these, connections. He's Mr. Miami, for if you don't
Mhm.
know him, and, he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "I was talking to my buddy at, the news director at one of the stations in Miami," and he's like, "Rick, we are actually asking waitresses if they want to come and produce the news in Miami. That's how bad it's getting." And I just was like, this is awful. This is horrible. I mean, just picking up people off the street. Hey, you want to produce? Because that's how little they're paying them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sally is the most active. Yes. It's very true.
Oh, they looks like people want you to interview Rick Sanchez.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I can get him on anytime.
Do all the producers eat crayons? All of my producers eat crayons, yes. Do yours?
No. I would just say, they like to play with the little, I don't even know, they're like little pom-poms, or they like to Holly has this little hot dog that she'll play fetch. My dog Buddy doesn't play fetch, but she plays fetch. So, yeah, that's what they do.
Maybe next time you're on, they'll interrupt and we can get a shot of them.
Exactly.
How much money are they paying? Okay, I always tell people that when I first started my job in Macon, Georgia, when I first got into the business, I was making $18,500 as a reporter, and that was before taxes.
Mine was
So,
Rockford, Illinois, 19,000. So we're
damn
not
girl, you
off.
beat me. You were like, I'm sitting there trying to feed myself, and you're just throwing money around with that extra $500.
What year did you start in?
2007 was my first job.
Okay, I was around 2012.
All right.
So good 4 years after. Maybe they went up a little bit because of inflation, or but
Or market. Macon, Georgia's pretty cheap. Where were you again? Where was your first
Rockford,
market?
Illinois, it's market 131.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty similar, but I don't know. Maybe Illinois has more taxes, or I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
Georgia was
Mhm.
a little cheaper to live in. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to do that without somebody helping you pay your bills. Like you either have savings that you've already gotten together, or your parents are helping you out, or you have a second job or something like that. I mean,
Worst thing I did was opened up a credit card and great credit, and I paid that thing off. I'm 35 now. 30 was when it was like, this
damn.
is done. This is done,
Yeah.
6 years later.
But you know what, Farron? Curious what you think. I'm not going to show this person's tweet, but somebody just quit my old newsroom. And I guess it's becoming more and more common for people to like leave in a ball of fire, like why go out quietly? Just,
Yeah.
just burn it down while you're leaving. And she said that something like, that reporters are not paid enough and they're not valued enough. And and somebody, when we were talking about producers, what would they get paid? They're paid even less. In Seattle, I would say producers were paid maybe 2/3 or less of what a reporter was paid.
Yeah. And do you know
So
overseas and in international networks, producers are paid more than reporters? Which I was like, "What?" Yeah.
yeah, and
Mhm.
what else was weird was how they would devalue the multimedia journalist, which is what I was, somebody who
Me
shot and
too.
edited all their own video. Like you were looked at as, I don't know, like blue
A
collar
peon?
labor or
A
something. And
peon?
so even though I did 3 jobs, I made less
Mhm.
money than a lot of the people who were just like, they just get to do their hair and jump on TV. And I was like, wait a second, I'm
Yeah.
doing all these extra jobs. Like I should make more money, but they didn't do that.
Well, and you saw it too, like when all of this started happening, where there was a huge shift in the media, like in 2016. I don't know if you've seen, there's been all of these legacy anchors from across the country where they've been there for 20, 25 years, and they get the boot because they had these cushy salaries.
Yep.
Every single anchoring job that I did, I was replacing somebody that had been there for like 20 years. And that's when I realized, like, ooh, this is changing, because as an anchor, like in South Bend, I think I started at like maybe 65,000, but I was having to mentor a newsroom, find stories, sometimes going out and shooting it myself, even as the main anchor. And their attitude is it's not the, like, I even tell people, I'm like, if you want to get into news, first of all, really consider. Second of all, it's not a money
Right.
making job. You have to truly love it. And two, if you think it's all about being on TV and you just want to be on TV, then just go start a TikTok, because
Mhm.
it's not about the glamour at all. You're out, like, covering forest fires. There were times I was out in the rain. I was 2 a.m. at shootings in Rockford, ninth most dangerous city in the country. Learned that after I moved there, and I was out in the rain looking at a wet dog. I have to come in, hurry up, put my report together, at the end of it all, I was like, I don't even want to go on TV. I don't even want to go on TV after the day that I just had, so
Oh
it's
yeah.
not a glamour business.
No. No, yeah, no, the first intern I ever had was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she refused to make her lunch ahead of time. And I told her, "You're going to get 3 shots, okay? And on the third one, if you do not bring your lunch, you will starve." And I'm not kidding you. I'm not going to stop. I don't care how fast the food is. We're not stopping. I don't have time. I bring my bag lunch, cuz I don't have time to eat.
Hmm.
So that third day, she didn't listen to me. She didn't bring her lunch, and she looked at me and she goes, "What, you're serious? You're not gonna let me eat lunch?" I'm like, "No, I'm not gonna I'm not, like, I'm serious. I don't have time to eat lunch." And then she goes, "All right, honestly," I remember she used to have these like really nice French manicure nails, acrylic nails,
You're like, those
always
are gonna go. That's
yeah,
the
always
first to
perfectly
go.
done. And yeah, she goes, "What did you make your first job? Just curious." Because she looked at her nails. She's like, "I mean, I need lunch. I need to get my nails done." She's like, and I go 18.5, and she's like, no, I'm not doing this. And she got into public relations, but it's like, you
Ugh,
have to be real with
the dark
people.
side.
I think, you're right. It's totally, it's a grind. And if at the end of the day, you don't have your makeup done, but you actually know what you're talking about, that's a win, because in a lot of cases, you
Right.
don't have your makeup done and you don't know what you're talking about. So
Exactly.
it's a double whammy. Okay.
Exactly.
Real fast. Let me just play this quick clip if I can
Mhm.
find it now. I'm like, have so many things pulled up because people had questions coming in. Okay, let me know if you can't hear this, okay, Faran? Because I gotta mute myself so you don't get feedback.
Mhm.
I can't not ask you about misinformation. It is a problem that plagues every social media platform, but it definitely plagues YouTube. And I know you've done a lot to put policies in place, tweak algorithms, to recommend the right things. But I have to wonder, in January, a global coalition of fact-checking organizations found YouTube to be a major conduit of fake news, despite all that you've put in place. So is this just a flaw in social media platforms that cannot be rectified? I mean, can we ever actually solve this, or is it just a problem that cannot be solved in the current way of platforms being operated?
We're definitely investing a huge amount to make sure that we're fighting misinformation. And there are a number of different ways that we look at this. So the first would be, from a policy standpoint, we would look at content that we would think about in terms of being violative of our policies. So if you look at COVID, for example, we came up with 10 different policies that we said would be violative. Like, an example of that would be saying that COVID came from something other than a virus. And we did see people attacking 5G equipment, for example, because they thought that it was causing COVID. And so that would just be an example of a policy that we would remove. So we do remove.
I always have to just break in here and tell anyone who's watching this with YouTube that Susan just said that. Okay, I did not just say that. Okay, because they don't even let you play Trump speeches anymore and criticize Trump speech. Because remember, I think it was The Hill that got suspended for even playing the Trump speech. And so, okay, your CEO just said that. So, all right, I'm just going to continue.
Yeah.
Content based on those policies, we actually publish that in a transparency report. The second one would be really raising up authoritative information. So if you are dealing with a sensitive subject like news, health, science,
everything, just basically everything.
Anything.
That's anything. She let out Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, but basically everything else. Yeah.
We are gonna make sure that what we're recommending is coming from a trusted, well-known publisher that can be reliable. And if you think about how Google works, it's very similar. Like, if you type in cancer or you type in COVID, what you're going to get are going to be names that you recognize. They're not going to be someone that just published a web page yesterday.
Like Faran.
It's very similar with regard to how we handle that on YouTube. The third is making sure that if there's content that's borderline content that technically meets our policy but is lower quality, that's content that we basically will not recommend to our users. Our users could still access it, but they will not recommend it. And then lastly, we're just really careful about what we monetize. So we always want to make sure that there's no incentive. So for example, with
so monetization, I'll stop it there. I mean, you get the point. So yeah, basically the last final kind of questions I had for you are, she's basically here you are, you're going into the news world to try to do better than you were doing in the corporate world. She's saying, though, you'd have a much better chance of succeeding. Well, not at RT because they just removed all that, but like somewhere else.
Exactly.
You would have a better chance because it's someone you've heard of before. Like, that's what an authoritative source is, someone you've heard of before. And I don't know how we and then the lady's like, that makes total sense. And there's nobody here asking her like, well, wait a second. Like, what about when they get things wrong? Or what about when they're paid propagandists by one or another particular special interest, or I don't know. I just think the idea of like, you've heard of them before as the standard for truth and reliability. It's just I think there are a lot of journalists that kind of still probably think that way. They wouldn't say it, but I just don't know how I don't know how you make it long term. That's my one concern, how you make it long term on a platform like YouTube if you really want to talk about stuff. She basically says like, we're just not interested in letting people do news that aren't part of the USA Today brand or the New York Times brand or whatever else. And I just think it's so unfortunate that a lot of people like agree with this. Like they actually think that what she just said makes sense. And I look at it and it blows my mind.
Well, and the one thing that I will say is number one, look where they're at, the World Economic Forum, who has
Right.
told
Good point.
people you will in the future you will own nothing and you will be happy. So that's number one. They look at everybody literally as peasants. And number two, you know, I miss the days of YouTube where it was actually just content creators and YouTube was exactly what it was, like a public space where anybody could monetize, anybody could have a message. I think where a lot of it changed when it comes to news was when they started allowing NBC, ABC, all of them to come into the algorithm and then be shown as the authoritative source. And that's what I think the biggest thing that she's leaving out there for those that are just coming into YouTube, for example, you know, like we remember YouTube back in 2011 when it was content creators making stupid, like the Maya he Numa Numa guy, you know, like, and then you had, you know, other content creators like, you know, True Journalist Joe Rogan, where he had his podcast in 2012 on YouTube. It was more of a creative space, and real journalism started kind of on there, especially in the form of podcasting. Then when again you had these legacy medias coming in and cashing in on it and moving all of those people out of the algorithm, and YouTube is part of that as well because they're partners with NBC, ABC, and they're also realizing, oh, that's how we can get money too, in case we don't make the ratings in cable or we accidentally piss off an advertiser, we still can at least get it through YouTube. That's what I think is the biggest problem. And you have the legacy medias completely flooding your news feeds. And if you go to search anything, you know, if you searched COVID or whatever, what are the first ones that are going to pop up? Every single legacy network and their reports versus, you know, and they'll come up even before people you subscribe to, just to make sure that you're not getting disinformation or to what they call their disinformation. They don't want you to research. They don't want you to think for yourself. They don't want critical thinking. Say what you will about him. Roger Ailes was an evil genius. Like he said, the American people don't know how to think, so let's do it for them. And that's probably the scariest words you'll ever hear or ever be written down in the history of media in the United States ever.
Faran, I really appreciate your taking the time to do this. Thank you,
Absolutely.
everybody, for the super chats. Well-known and reliable sources, LOL, about Susan, I'm guessing. And there was also one, if I can get back to it. Oh, yeah, here we go. My two favorite reporters. So that's very nice. There was
Hey.
also, before I let you go, there was also a request that you cover this at some point on your show. If you haven't, hacked documents reveal Ecuador's failed effort to take an NSA whistleblower, Ed Snowden. So maybe consider that.
Absolutely.
And just going back to your channel again, everybody go to Faran Balanced and check her out, subscribe. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, I gotta say, from one to the other, keep up the good fight. You're doing an amazing job as well. I'm jealous at the amount of your subscriber count. Let me tell you.
Don't be, because your view count's way bigger than mine. So
But I don't know
don't
what it
be.
is. Yeah, if it's either view count or subscribers, but either way, they have it out for us. And I'm really thankful to come on and talk with you. And I would love to do roundtables and stuff like that because
Yeah.
I feel like it's just a small little niche of us that have been in there, that have seen it for what it is, and we're calling it out. And I think the people like that. It's just that our voices are being really, really heavily on mute because they don't want people to learn this stuff. And the more of us there are, maybe there will be a change when it comes to the media. We'll see.
Mhm. Well, and you know, I don't know what the future is for corporate news. I'm guessing it's going to be there for as long as I'm
Of
alive
course, yeah.
anyway, right?
Mhm.
But maybe, you know, you start, because I do know there are some people still in the industry that watch. And so I hope that that we can create an environment where, it sounds so dumb, but like you normalize thinking outside the box and questioning the comfortable narrative that we've sort of been sold. I didn't notice this when I first got in the business, but the idea when I got in was like a journalist looked for the dissenting opinion, looked for the outsider, looked for the scary ideas, and tried to understand them, or at least figure out, like, how did this person arrive at this conclusion? Instead, now I feel like what the sort of subtext is, even if it's not said out loud, is that you're like platforming or endorsing those ideas. And so your job now as a journalist is to silence that, not try to
Mhm.
figure out like how did they arrive at that conclusion, and are they bringing any valuable insight to the discussion. It's just like mob, I don't know, bumblebee soccer with journalism. Like, let's put out this fire and put out this fire and put out this fire. And I think just thinking back to the 2020 election, or not, 2016 election,
Mhm.
what I remember being so different was like the New York Times even just saying we have to do journalism differently because we're just in this era of extreme danger. So we just have to stop the whole objectivity game, even though one could absolutely argue that that was never real before. But now it
Exactly.
was like we're just gonna go full bore on this is the way we think society should look, and we're gonna push you in that direction. And however the level of danger goes, so goes the level of sort of censorship, or the idea that, again, you can't associate with people who have these outsider ideas. And I just hope that, like, when we talk about this stuff, it gives I don't know, it just gives people who are still in the industry a little bit of relief that, like, you're not crazy if you're looking around
Yes.
thinking, wait a second, can't we ask a question about this, or can't we criticize this, or why can't we, like, at least just they don't think you're alone. Because I think part of the insidious result of censorship and muting of voices is that idea that, like, when you start putting people in these little boxes and echo chambers, and you don't see people as actually associating with each other anymore, you don't see ideas associating with them anymore, you do start to feel like you're all alone, and then you're like, well, I better not say anything. And, because what are the consequences, social and other, professional and otherwise? And so I hope that we can at least just show, like, no, you're going to be okay. In other words, you're not going to turn into dust. Like, if you ask that question, or you push back on this, it's not like tomorrow you're going to just catch on fire, and,
Right.
life is still
Mhm.
going to go on.
And I
Anyway.
also think too, taking the narcissism out of journalism as well. I think journalism has become a very narcissistic profession. I mean, you
Totally.
look at the first thing you have to look at is a journalist is supposed to question everything. I mean, that was one of the reasons I was that kid. Why? 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 You might get that with your toddler soon. I was that toddler where my mom was like, "Shut up," but I was always looking at everything and questioning everything. And that's what a journalist is supposed to do. Yeah, we kind of fight for the underdog and all that, but the reason why we're fighting for the underdog is it's like, well, wait, why are they marginalized? Why is nobody coming out for them? And that's why journalism has always appeared liberal. However, it's turned into this complete narcissistic profession. You have guys like Jim Acosta, who was doing a good job at holding Trump's feet to the fire, but then what did he do on CNN? It was, well, I asked the president and he started yelling at me and blah, blah. And it was just like, journalism 101. The news is not about you. You are not
Hmm.
the story. The story is the story. And that's what I fear in this young narcissistic society, is that people want to be the next Jim Acosta type, who I see all the time here in DC walking his dog, by the way. And him and
I
him
asked
and
him to come
AOC
on
and all
for
of them.
Oh, no,
Mhm.
it wasn't Jim Acosta. I asked Brian Stelter to come on once for an interview, and he did write me back, but he said he couldn't because of his contract. I call bullshit on
Okay.
that because I've seen him on
Yeah.
other independent podcasts, but
Yeah.
whatever. I think he didn't want to talk about what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Somebody said that hell hath no fury like a woman who's been I'm trying to find it. Basically saying like we were screwed over and we're just mad. I honestly have no
No.
yeah,
And
I don't
honestly,
have
if
any
if
ill
there's
will.
a local news station that's actually contacted me and they're like, "Hey, we
Here
love
it is.
what you've done. We want to bring your investigative stuff here to our city." It's a very small city, and I'm like, "Hey, I'll think about it," because I will say, living in these larger cities and seeing kind of what's happening, especially the crime here in DC is up. Going to a smaller city, mentoring young reporters, I would have no problem doing that and being the anchor again. I have no problem. But I feel like I said, like, it's those small cities that are willing to be like, well, hey, we can have the time to have investigative
Mhm.
teams. And, that's what they would want me to do, is build up an investigative team. And I'm like, what better way to start helping the industry than doing that? You're not going to get that in those big cities, though, which is just such a
Mhm.
shame.
Mhm. And I've also thought too about the value, if we could make it happen someday, of just putting a group together that has has a bunch of different either experiences or ideas about you could even talk just direct headlines, almost like putting them through a journalism course that is taught by people who you just assume they look this way, so they think this way, but they don't, like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of because newsrooms are so focused on diversity of the way people look right now, but they're not
Yes.
seemingly so interested in the way people think. And so I want to put together some kind of group that goes in and like, no, not all, women think like this. Not all Black people think like that. Not all veterans think like this, just to show like because they're putting people through training right now, which I know in my old company, Tegna, you have to see race relations this way. So if you cover anything that has to do with race, you have to see it through this particular lens, which then basically tells them like you could end up in HR if you don't. So forget questioning or anything else. So how often is that happening on other topics? I mean, they're outwardly training in that, but I mean, it's just a matter of time before newsrooms start saying, when it comes to war or public health, let's bring in the public health trainers. Don't question this because otherwise you're putting the public in danger. Now all of a sudden, you're just outwardly being trained that you have to think about topics a certain way. And that to me, I just want to do the opposite. Like bring in the trainers who are like, no, like let's just throw it all up and let's start talking about the ideas that nobody ever told me were even out there when I first started in the business. I just had no manager, no leadership really, like you were talking about, that said, wait a second, Allison. I mean, come on, like, the government has these huge communications teams. They're constantly working with special interests to sort of manipulate newsrooms, press releases. They're not the gospel. Like if a hospital sends out a press release, we just run, here's a doctor to talk to you right now. Well, what's their buy-in? Like, why do they want you to talk? Nobody was ever saying anything at all about that kind of stuff to me. Upvote creative conflict. I'm not sure what that means, but anyway, we'll go. That's our final thought, everyone. So Faran Balanced. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for the tips. Go check out my sponsors and be well.